Alaska natives lived on their land for over 10,000 years, surviving in one of the harshest environments on Earth, developing sophisticated cultures and stewarding the territory since the end of the Ice Age. Yet they couldn't legally own any of it until 1971, just 53 years ago, meaning your parents or grandparents were alive when indigenous peoples who had occupied Alaska for millennia were finally allowed to own their ancestral land. Ready to find out how this is even possible? When Alaska became a U.S. state in 1959, Alaska natives including Inuit, Yupik, Aleut, Tlingit, Haida, Athabaskan, and other nations legally owned 0 acres of the land their ancestors had lived on for over 10,000 years, despite making up a significant portion of the population. The U.S. government claimed all unoccupied land when it purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867 for $7.2 million. But the land wasn't unoccupied. It was home to tens of thousands of indigenous peoples who had villages, fishing sites, hunting grounds, and sacred places that had been used continuously since before recorded history. Alaska natives had no legal ownership rights, couldn't get mortgages, couldn't sell or develop land, and had no say over what happened to their ancestral territories. They lived as essentially tenants on land their families had occupied for 400-plus generations. When Alaska became a state, the state government began claiming massive amounts of land for itself, and oil companies started exploring and drilling without any compensation or consent from the indigenous peoples whose land was being exploited for profit. The discovery of oil at Prudhoe Bay in 1968 created a crisis. Oil companies wanted to build a pipeline across Alaska, but they couldn't get clear title to the land because Alaska natives had never ceded their territory through treaties, creating a legal obstacle to the multi-billion-dollar oil industry. Alaska natives organized and filed lawsuits asserting their Aboriginal land rights. They argued that they had continuously occupied and used the land for thousands of years, and that neither Russia nor the U.S. had ever legally acquired ownership from them. The federal government and oil companies realized they had to settle native land claims or face endless litigation that would block the pipeline and oil development. So economic pressure finally forced action that moral arguments had failed to achieve for over a century. In 1971, Congress passed the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, ANCSA. This gave Alaska natives title to 44 million acres and $962.5 million in compensation, finally recognizing land ownership for peoples who had lived there since mammoths walked the earth. But here's the catch. Instead of creating reservations with tribal sovereignty, like in the lower 48, ANCSA created native-owned corporations. Alaska natives became shareholders in for-profit businesses that owned the land, not members of sovereign nations with treaty rights. This corporate structure meant Alaska natives got land ownership but lost some sovereignty. They couldn't create their own laws or govern themselves the way tribes in other states could, and their land ownership was tied to corporate shares that could be sold or inherited, potentially diluting native control over generations. The 1971 settlement was also a fraction of what was taken. Alaska is 365 million acres total, so Alaska natives received about 12% of their ancestral territory in exchange for giving up claims to the other 88%, and the $962.5 million payment for land that had supported their peoples for 10,000 years was essentially nothing. Oil companies got what they wanted. The pipeline was built, billions of dollars worth of oil extracted, and Alaska natives received a small percentage while corporations and the government profited massively from resources that had been on indigenous land. The fact that this happened in 1971, not 1871 or 1771, but 1971, shows that indigenous land theft wasn't ancient history. It was happening during the Vietnam War, Civil Rights Movement, and moon landing, while most Americans had no idea. Alaska Native communities today still struggle with the consequences of ANCSA. Some corporate structures have worked well, others have led to internal conflicts, and the lack of full sovereignty means Alaska Natives have less self-determination than many tribes in the lower 48. Compare this timeline. Alaska natives lived on their land for 10,000 plus years, couldn't own it for 104 years under U.S. control, 1867 to 1971, and have only owned portions of it for 53 years, meaning they've legally owned their ancestral land for 0.5% of the time they've actually lived there. The absurdity is staggering. Someone's great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, going back 200-plus generations, lived on the same land, but their great-grandparents couldn't legally own it, and only their parents' generation finally got ownership, and even then, not all of it, and not with full sovereignty. If you think the fact that Alaska natives couldn't own their land until 1971 should be taught in every American history class as an example of how recent Indigenous dispossession actually is, share this and follow for more injustices that happened in your parents' lifetime, not ancient history.